Around 70,000 years ago, in the valleys of East Africa, small bands of Homo sapiens, our direct ancestors, set out on a journey that would define the destiny of our species. For hundreds of thousands of years, they had lived in Africa, perfectly adapted to savannas, rivers, and the predators they knew well. But then, driven by shifting climates, competition for resources, or perhaps simply by curiosity, they looked north and east toward horizons no one in their kind had ever seen. Their possessions were humble: sharp stone tools, the fire that kept them alive in the night, and stories whispered around the flames. Yet within them lay something new, something no other human species had mastered: the power of complex language, the ability to unite in large groups, to share dreams, strategies, and fears. Crossing the Sinai Peninsula into the Levantha crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe, they believed the challenges ahead would be wild beasts and unfamiliar winters. But beyond those deserts and forests waited something far more profound. It wasn't animals. It wasn't mythical gods. It was other humans. Beings with strength, skill, and thoughtful eyes. Humans like us, yet not us. And this first encounter would forever alter the fate of humankind. When the first bands of Homo sapiens stepped out of Africa, they did not immediately scatter across the globe. Their earliest destination was a narrow strip of land we now call the Levant, modern-day Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. At first glance, this land seemed merely another extension of Africa: hills, river valleys, and caves nestled in limestone cliffs. Yet, in truth, the Levant was far more than a landscape. It was a stage, a crossroads of humanity, where for tens of thousands of years, different species of humans had converged, competed, and sometimes lived side by side. Archaeology has given us glimpses of this world. In caves like Skull and Kafsa in Israel, skeletons of Homo sapiens dating back more than 100,000 years have been unearthed. These individuals were among the first known pioneers out of Africa. They buried their dead with flowers and red ochre, suggesting symbolic thought and ritual, a spark of culture that linked them with us across the ages. For decades, scholars debated whether these early migrants represented a true exodus or only a temporary excursion. The evidence suggests that their presence was real, but fragile, and perhaps short-lived. Climate shifts and competition may have driven them back south, leaving the Levant to others. Who were those others? To the north and west, in caves such as Taban and Amud, another kind of human thrived: the Neanderthals. Stockier, more muscular, adapted to cold climates, they had been masters of Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years. For Neanderthals, the Levant was the southern edge of their range. For sapiens, it was the northern frontier. And so, this narrow strip of land became a zone of overlap, where two species of humans stood face to face for the first time. Imagine the Levant 70,000 years ago. Herds of gazelles roamed grassy valleys. Rivers cut through fertile plains, teeming with fish and waterfowl. Fig trees and wild cereals grew in patches, offering food to anyone with the knowledge to harvest them. To humans, whether Neanderthal or sapiens, it was a land of opportunity, but also of competition. In caves, flickers of firelight reflected from stone walls. Families huddled together, fashioning stone blades using the lavawa technique, a sophisticated method of flaking stone into sharp, predictable shapes. Archaeologists today often find these tools in mixed layers, some associated with Neanderthals, others with sapiens, sometimes even in the same site. This overlap tells a story. The two groups were not isolated by geography. They were neighbors, perhaps rivals, and occasionally something more. The Levant was not a wide continent where groups could spread endlessly apart. It was a bottleneck, a corridor between deserts and seas. Here, encounters were not just possible, they were inevitable. What happened when a band of sapiens met Neanderthals in a valley or at a watering hole? We can never know with certainty, but we can sketch possibilities from evidence and logic. Sapiens were newcomers, fewer in number, probably cautious. Neanderthals were established, confident in their domain. At first, encounters may have been tense standoffs, hunters glaring across a river, hands tightening on spears, uncertain whether the strangers were allies or enemies. Over time, such meetings might have taken many forms. Competition seems unavoidable. Both species hunted gazelles, ibex, and wild cattle. Both sought caves for shelter and streams for water. When prey herds thinned or winters grew harsh, competition could have turned to open conflict. Fossil evidence shows Neanderthals suffered high rates of traumatic injuries, broken bones, skull fractures similar to those of rodeo riders today. Perhaps some of those wounds came not from animals, but from clashes with other humans. Yet cooperation is equally plausible. Humans are opportunistic. Survival often favors pragmatism over pride. A band of sapiens, lost in unfamiliar terrain, might have trailed Neanderthals to learn new hunting grounds. Neanderthals, in turn, might have scavenged from sapiens' kills. Over time, they may have exchanged more than glares, they could have exchanged knowledge. The bones unearthed in the Levant speak volumes. The skull and Kafsa skeletons show features both modern and archaic, hinting at a population in transition. Some skulls are rounded, with chins like ours. Others are more robust, echoing Neanderthal traits. Could these variations be evidence of interbreeding even at this early stage? Many scientists think so. Genetic studies reveal that all non-African humans today carry about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. This means interbreeding must have occurred soon after sapiens left Africa, and the Levant is the most likely stage. These unions were not just accidents of lust or violence, they had profound evolutionary consequences. Through Neanderthal DNA, sapiens gained alleles that strengthened immune systems, enhanced skin adaptation, and shaped hair texture. Without those genetic gifts, our ancestors might not have survived in Eurasia. It is tempting to imagine a moment, deep in a cave, when a Neanderthal woman and a sapiens man, or vice versa, formed a bond. Whether fleeting or lasting, such unions bridged two species and stitched their legacies into a single human story. Despite these encounters, the first waves of sapiens in the Levant did not endure. Climate shifts pushed deserts further north, drying up rivers and grasslands. Around 80,000 years ago, Neanderthals seem to have reclaimed dominance in the region. The early sapiens disappeared, perhaps retreating back into Africa, perhaps merging into Neanderthal populations, leaving only traces in DNA. But history is rarely a single chance. Around 50,000 to 60,000 years ago, another great migration surged out of Africa. This time, sapiens carried with them not just tools and fire, but cultural revolutions, symbolic art, ornaments, long-distance trade, and more advanced weapons. When they entered the Levant again, the balance of power began to shift for good. The Levant was more than just a meeting place between sapiens and Neanderthals. It was a testing ground, a crucible where human adaptability was forged. Here, sapiens learned what it meant to face others like themselves, similar enough to compete, different enough to challenge their identity. It is no coincidence that later, as sapiens spread across Eurasia, echoes of these early encounters shaped their strategies. They knew how to adapt to new environments, how to learn from others, and when necessary, how to absorb them. The Levant was their first great lesson in coexistence and conquest. Close your eyes and imagine a cold evening in a limestone cave above the Galilee. Smoke curls upward from a small fire where a family of Neanderthals roasts meat. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps at the cave mouth. Strangers appear slender, darker-skinned, carrying tools shaped slightly differently. The Neanderthals tense, spears in hand. The newcomers pause, wary but curious. In that silence hangs a choice: to fight, to flee, or to find a way to share the warmth of the fire. In that moment, the future of humankind teeters on the edge. Every gesture, every glance, holds the weight of destiny. The Levant was the first threshold, the place where Homo sapiens stepped beyond Africa and discovered they were not alone. It was here, in these narrow valleys and ancient caves, that humanity's first encounters unfolded, sometimes violent, sometimes intimate, always transformative. From this fragile foothold, sapiens would eventually surge across continents, meeting Denisovans in the east, hobbits in the islands, and countless challenges from nature itself. But it all began here, in the Levant, where two kinds of humans stood face to face and recognized, perhaps for the first time, that the world was larger, stranger, and more complex than they had ever imagined. When Homo sapiens pushed deeper into the Levant, they stepped fully into Neanderthal territory. The encounters that followed were not abstract. They were real, lived experiences: hunters stalking the same herds, families claiming the same caves, strangers watching one another from across rivers. This was the first time in Earth's history that two distinct species of humans confronted each other directly. Archaeology shows that sapiens and Neanderthals did not merely brush past each other. They coexisted in overlapping regions for thousands of years. In caves like Khabara and Amud in Israel, Neanderthal skeletons reveal long habitation. Yet, not far away, sapiens' bones and tools appear in layers from similar time frames. The two species lived so close that avoidance was impossible. Neanderthals were formidable, shorter but stockier than sapiens, with broad chests and powerful arms. They were well suited to close-range hunting. Their eyes were slightly larger, adapted to Europe's dimmer light. They carried thrusting spears, perfect for ambushing prey. Sapiens, by contrast, were more lightly built, but faster over long distances. Their tools were sharper, crafted for precision cuts. Most importantly, they likely had more complex language, which allowed larger groups to coordinate hunts and share strategies. The Levant became a laboratory of comparison. Two ways of being human, tested side by side. Resources in the Levant were rich, but not infinite. Gazelles, wild cattle, and ibex could only feed so many mouths. When populations grew or winters hardened, both sapiens and Neanderthals would have felt the strain. Fossil records show high rates of injury among Neanderthals: broken bones, healed fractures, skull wounds. Many were likely the result of dangerous hunts. Yet some wounds, especially cranial trauma, could also reflect violent clashes. Imagine two hunting parties converging on the same herd. Spears fly, tempers ignite, and soon blood is spilled not from prey, but from rival humans. Still, competition was not always direct combat. Sometimes it was subtler, sapiens arriving late to a valley only to find Neanderthals had already claimed the caves. Neanderthals returning from a hunt to discover sapiens had stripped berry bushes or scared off game. In such moments, tensions simmered even without open conflict. But humans are more than fighters. We are learners, imitators, borrowers. In the Levant, it is likely that sapiens and Neanderthals observed each other and adopted useful tricks. For instance, both groups used the Levallois technique of shaping stone tools. Did they develop it independently, or did one teach the other? Archaeologists debate this fiercely. What is clear is that in overlapping regions, tools show hybrid features, blending methods from both traditions. Fire too may have been shared. Neanderthals had long mastered fire, using hearths deep in caves. Sapiens, with their social storytelling, may have refined fire's role as a communal hub. Over time, both species could have influenced each other in subtle but profound ways. Such exchanges blur the line between us and them. To imagine sapiens and Neanderthals as eternally hostile tribes is too simple. Reality was a spectrum: rivalry, curiosity, imitation, and sometimes connection. The most intimate connection of all is written in our DNA. Every person alive today, outside Africa, carries about 1 to 2% Neanderthal genes. This is not theory, it is measurable in every cell. These genes govern aspects of skin color, immune function, even mood regulation. How did this happen? Through interbreeding. but the context is debated. Some unions may have been violent, the result of raids or coercion. Others may have been consensual, even affectionate. To reduce thousands of years of interaction to a single scenario is impossible. What we know is that interbreeding was not a rare accident. It happened repeatedly, across different regions. The Levant, as the first zone of overlap, is the most likely origin. A Neanderthal mother might have raised a half-sapiens child. A sapiens band might have absorbed a Neanderthal hunter. Over time, such individuals would have woven the two lineages together. These unions were not just personal, they were evolutionary gambles. For sapiens, Neanderthal genes provided resilience against Eurasian diseases and climates. For Neanderthals, sapiens brought fresh genetic diversity to populations that may have been dwindling. In these bodies, love, violence, and survival all fused into biology. Could sapiens and Neanderthals have shared culture beyond genes? Evidence suggests they may have. Neanderthals buried their dead, sometimes with flowers or grave goods. Sapiens arriving in the Levant already practiced symbolic rituals. Perhaps, in observing each other's customs, both species deepened their sense of meaning. Ornaments, beads, pierced shells, pigments appear in both Neanderthal and sapiens sites. Did Neanderthals learn adornment from sapiens, or the other way around? The truth may be that they co-inspired each other. In this way, the Levant was not just a battlefield of survival. It was also a meeting ground of minds. Two species of human, each capable of imagination, creativity, and ritual, encountered one another. In that encounter, sparks of culture leaped between them. For thousands of years, the balance between sapiens and Neanderthals remained uncertain. Neanderthals were established, better adapted to Eurasia's climate. Sapiens were adaptable, but still newcomers. Yet, gradually, sapiens gained the edge. Their ability to form larger, more cohesive groups may have tipped the scales. In conflict, numbers matter. In famine, trade networks spread risk. And in culture, symbols and stories bind communities beyond bloodlines. By the time sapiens launched their second great migration out of Africa, around 60,000 years ago, they carried with them more advanced tools, art, and social organization. In future encounters, they would no longer merely coexist with Neanderthals, they would begin to replace them. What remains today of those first meetings? Not bones, for most have long turned to dust. Not tools, for stone cannot tell the warmth of a handshake or the fury of a spear thrust. What remains is in us. Every time our immune systems fight off a flu virus, we may thank Neanderthal DNA. Every time we trace the curve of a jaw or the color of a strand of hair, we may glimpse echoes of Neanderthal ancestors. These encounters were not footnotes. They were formative, shaping who we are. And yet, there is tragedy. For Neanderthals, coexistence with sapiens was a prelude to disappearance. Within 20,000 years of these first encounters, they would vanish as a distinct people, their legacy preserved only in fragments of our genome. For sapiens, the encounters were a lesson. We were not alone, and survival meant more than brute force. It meant adaptation, absorption, and sometimes the uncomfortable truth that human is not one thing, but many. In the Levant, face to face with Neanderthals, Homo sapiens first glimpsed the complexity of their journey. The world beyond Africa was not empty. It was already human, shaped by cousins both fierce and familiar. The encounters were a mirror. In Neanderthals, sapiens saw strength and skill but also fragility. They saw what they could become, and what they might lose. And as they pressed further east and north, these lessons followed them, carried in memory, in culture, and in the double helix of their DNA. The story would not end in the Levant. Beyond the mountains lay new horizons, Central Asia, Siberia, and encounters with yet another mysterious lineage, the Denisovans. When sapiens left the Levant and pushed further east, they entered lands where Neanderthals had never ruled. Beyond the mountains of Central Asia lay forests, steppes, and icy plateaus, vast wild territories few humans had ever seen. Here, sapiens expected animals, cold winds, and hunger. What they did not expect was another kind of human. For centuries, these encounters remained invisible to history. Unlike Neanderthals, the Denisovans left almost no skeletons, no iconic skulls in museum halls. Their story was hidden in fragments: a finger bone the size of a pea, a tooth as big as a horse's molar, traces of DNA clinging to dust in cave floors. And yet, from these fragments, science has reconstructed a remarkable truth. Another species of human once lived across Asia, and when sapiens met them, the encounter changed us forever. The story begins in Denisova Cave, nestled in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. Cold winds sweep through pine forests. Snow gathers at the cave's mouth. In 2008, Russian archaeologists digging here uncovered a small bone fragment, so small it was nearly discarded. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, just another fossil among thousands. But when scientists extracted DNA from the bone in 2010, they were stunned. The genome was not Neanderthal. It was not sapiens. It belonged to something else, a lineage that had split from Neanderthals hundreds of thousands of years earlier. This new branch was named after the cave where it was found, the Denisovans. The implications were staggering. For decades, we thought the main story was sapiens and Neanderthals. Suddenly, a hidden chapter of humanity had emerged. And genetic evidence revealed something even more shocking. Denisovans had not simply vanished into the cold. They had left part of themselves in us. While skeletal remains are rare, DNA evidence tells us Denisovans once roamed vast territories from the frozen mountains of Siberia to the tropical islands of Southeast Asia. This range was astonishingly broad, suggesting they were as adaptable as sapiens. In the Tibetan Plateau, a 160,000-year-old jawbone found in Bashia Karst Cave revealed Denisovan DNA. This showed that long before sapiens set foot there, Denisovans had already conquered high altitudes where oxygen is thin. In fact, one of the most famous Denisovan genetic legacies, the EPA's one gene helps modern Tibetans survive at extreme elevations. Without Denisovans, Sherpas and Tibetan herders might never have thrived on the roof of the world. To the south, Denisovan DNA lingers strongly among populations in Papua New Guinea, Melanesia, and Aboriginal Australia. This means that when sapiens journeyed through Southeast Asia and crossed into Oceania, they encountered Denisovans Ugandan, interbred. The picture that emerges is not of a small, isolated group, but of a powerful lineage spread across half the planet. So what happened when sapiens, moving eastward around 50,000 years ago, entered Denisovan lands? The evidence, though fragmentary, points to encounters rich in both tension and exchange. Like Neanderthals, Denisovans were skilled hunters and toolmakers. They likely resembled their Neanderthal cousins in build: strong, robust, adapted to harsh environments. Yet genetic evidence suggests they carried unique traits, perhaps darker skin and eyes, perhaps features suited for Asia's diverse climates. For sapiens, meeting Denisovans was both challenge and opportunity. These were not beasts, but humans different enough to be strange, similar enough to understand. The encounters must have varied: moments of wary competition on hunting grounds, moments of intimacy in shared shelters, moments of violence when resources ran thin. The proof lies in our DNA. Some populations today carry not just one, but multiple layers of Denisovan ancestry, evidence of repeated interbreeding events. In Papua and Melanesia, up to 5% of the genome comes from Denisovans, far more than the Neanderthal share. This was no single night of contact. It was centuries, even millennia, of overlapping lives. Denisovan genes did more than mingle. They saved lives. High-altitude adaptation, the EPA's one variant, inherited from Denisovans, allows Tibetans to live above 4,000 meters without fatal oxygen loss. Immune system resilience. Denisovan DNA contributed alleles that helped sapiens fend off unfamiliar Asian viruses and parasites. Metabolic changes. Some Denisovan genes may have influenced fat storage and energy use, crucial in cold climates. In a sense, Denisovans prepared sapiens for Asia before sapiens even knew Asia. Without their genetic gifts, many migrations might have failed. Were Denisovans culturally advanced like Neanderthals? Evidence is scarce, but hints exist. At Denisova Cave, beads, pendants, and sophisticated stone tools were found in layers containing Denisovan DNA. Some items even include bracelets of polished green stone, drilled with precision that stunned archaeologists. Could Denisovans have crafted them? If so, their abilities rivaled those of sapiens. This raises tantalizing questions. Did sapiens borrow techniques from Denisovans? Did they trade ornaments, pigments, or tools? In Southeast Asia, as sapiens moved through islands, did Denisovans guide them across treacherous waters? We may never know the details, but the genetic legacy proves that contact was far more than fleeting. And yet, despite their vast range and power, Denisovans disappeared. By 40,000 years ago, their distinct identity was gone, absorbed or extinguished as sapiens spread. Why? Several forces likely converged. Climate shifts of the Ice Age reduced habitable zones. Small, scattered populations were vulnerable to collapse. Competition with sapiens, who arrived in larger, better connected groups. Perhaps even assimilation. Denisovans merging so thoroughly with sapiens that only their genes remained. Unlike Neanderthals, whose bones tell vivid stories, Denisovans vanished almost without a trace. They left no faces for us to reconstruct, no skeletons to stand in museums. Their existence was nearly erased until DNA resurrected them. Today, Denisovans live on, not as skeletons in caves, but in the blood of millions. Every breath a Sherpa takes on Mount Everest, every heartbeat of a highland herder in Tibet, every strand of Melanesian DNA, these are whispers of Denisovans. They remind us that our species did not rise alone. We are a tapestry woven from many threads, stitched together through encounters both tender and brutal. The Denisovans, once invisible, now stand revealed as crucial ancestors in our shared story. The meeting of sapiens and Denisovans was not a footnote, it was a turning point. From Siberia's icy caves to the sunlit islands of Oceania, their encounters shaped the very biology of modern humans. When we look eastward in our story, we see not empty lands waiting for conquest, but a stage already inhabited by powerful cousins. We see Denisovans' shadows brought back to life by science, who gave us gifts that still flow in our veins. And as sapiens moved further, into Europe and beyond, new dramas unfolded, clashes and fusions that would decide which humans survived, and which became memories in our DNA. When we think of humanity's ancient cousins, the spotlight falls almost always on Neanderthals and Denisovans. They are the giants of our story, the ones whose DNA still courses through our veins. But scattered across islands and jungles, far from the icy caves of Europe or the steppes of Siberia, lived other humans, smaller, stranger, and for a long time, invisible to history. In the last 2 decades, discoveries in Indonesia and the Philippines have revealed 2 remarkable species, Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbits of Flores Island, and Homo luzonensis, a mysterious lineage from Luzon. They were tiny in stature but enormous in significance, rewriting our picture of human diversity. When sapiens journeyed into Southeast Asia, they almost certainly encountered these forgotten cousins. The story begins in 2003, when archaeologists excavating Liang Bua Cave on the Indonesian island of Flores uncovered a skeleton unlike any they had ever seen. At first, they assumed it was a child. The bones were small, the skull no larger than a grapefruit. But closer examination revealed the truth. This was not a child, but an adult standing barely 1 meter tall. The species was named Homo floresiensis, nicknamed hobbits after Tolkien's mythical characters. These humans had lived on Flores until as recently as 50,000 years ago. They survived well into the era of modern humans. Their discovery shocked science. How could such small humans survive alongside giants like Neanderthals and Sapiens? The answer lay in their island home. Flores is isolated, cut off by deep ocean channels. On islands, evolution often plays by different rules. Large animals shrink into dwarfs, small ones grow into giants. On Flores, elephants became miniature stegodons, while lizards grew into Komodo dragons. And humans, too, shrank into hobbits. The hobbits were not primitive. Their tools, stone blades, points, and scrapers were sophisticated, suited for hunting and butchering. Burned bones of animals suggest they mastered fire. They hunted small elephants, giant storks, and perhaps even defended themselves against Komodo dragons. Their brains were tiny, about 1/3 the size of sapiens. Yet intelligence is not only about brain size. The hobbits survived for hundreds of thousands of years in a challenging environment. They adapted, innovated, and thrived. For sapiens arriving in Southeast Asia, stumbling upon hobbits must have been bewildering. Imagine meeting a band of humans no taller than a child, yet armed with sharp tools, speaking in unfamiliar sounds, living in caves with fires glowing in the dark. They would have seemed at once alien and familiar, a reflection of humanity in miniature. If the hobbits were astonishing, an even stranger revelation came in 2019, when researchers in the Callao Cave on the Philippine island of Luzon announced the discovery of another species, Homo luzonensis. From only a handful of teeth, hand bones, and foot bones, scientists realized they were looking at something unique. The teeth were small and oddly shaped, unlike any other human. The curved finger and toe bones suggested climbing ability, as if these humans still spent part of their lives in trees. Homo luzonensis may have stood small like the hobbits, but their exact appearance remains unknown. What is clear is that they lived at least 67,000 years ago, and possibly much later. Which means, once again, sapiens could have crossed paths with them. So what happened when sapiens reached these islands? Did they meet the hobbits and luzonensis face to face? The timelines overlap. Homo floresiensis survived until about 50,000 years ago. Sapiens were already in Southeast Asia by then. Likewise, the Philippines show evidence of early sapiens' presence tens of thousands of years ago. Encounters seem almost certain, but unlike Neanderthals and Denisovans, these island cousins left no genetic trace in us. If interbreeding occurred, it left no mark, or their genes were swallowed by the vast waves of sapiens' DNA. More likely, sapiens outcompeted them for resources, bringing technologies and social networks the smaller species could not match. And so, like whispers in the jungle, these humans vanished. The hobbits of Flores disappeared around the time sapiens arrived. Luzonensis, too, faded into silence. Whether they were absorbed, displaced, or extinguished, we may never know. At first glance, the hobbits and Luzonensis might seem like side notes in the grand story of human evolution. But they matter deeply, for 3 reasons. They expand the map of humanity. For decades, we imagined human history as a simple tree: sapiens in Africa, Neanderthals in Europe, maybe Denisovans in Asia. But Flores and Luzon show us the tree was tangled, with branches everywhere, even on remote islands. They challenge our assumptions. Small brains, tiny bodies, yet survival for hundreds of thousands of years. Intelligence and success are not measured by size alone. They remind us of fragility. These humans lived, laughed, and loved, just as others did. But when sapiens arrived, they vanished swiftly. Their fate is a warning. Uniqueness does not guarantee survival. By the time sapiens reached Southeast Asia and Oceania, the planet was crowded with humans. Not crowded in numbers, populations were small, scattered but crowded in diversity. Imagine the world 50,000 years ago. In Europe and the Middle East, Neanderthals still thrived. In Siberia and Central Asia, Denisovans ranged far and wide. In Indonesia, hobbits huddled in caves. In the Philippines, Luzonenses left their footprints. In Africa, other archaic lineages may still have lingered. This was not a world with one kind of human. It was a world of many humans, sharing the earth like overlapping shadows. And yet, within a few millennia, only one voice remained. One by one, these other species disappeared. By 30,000 years ago, Neanderthals were gone. Denisovans lingered as ghosts in our DNA. The hobbits and Luzonenses slipped into extinction even earlier. Why sapiens survived when others did not is a question scholars still wrestle with. Was it luck, climate, or something unique in our minds? Perhaps it was our ability to absorb, to borrow, to adapt and, sometimes, brutally, to replace. The hobbits of Flores and the hidden humans of Luzon remind us that our story is not a straight line but a chorus. Once, the world was filled with different kinds of humans, each adapting in their own way. We were not alone, and we were not inevitable. Their disappearance is our inheritance. In every island, every cave, every vanished cousin, lies a truth. Survival is fragile, and history could have been different. If the hobbits had endured, if Luzonenses had thrived, we might be sharing the planet today with other kinds of people, smaller, stranger, yet human all the same. But they are gone, and we remain. The forgotten cousins fade into memory, while sapiens march onward, carrying not just their own legacy, but the silence of all the others. By the time Homo sapiens had crossed into Eurasia, the world was already inhabited by other humans. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and smaller island cousins had lived there for hundreds of thousands of years. They had survived ice ages, predators, and shifting landscapes. When sapiens arrived, they did not come to a blank canvas, they came to a stage where others had already written their lines. The question is, did sapiens learn from these other humans, trade ideas, or simply take what they needed? The answer lies in a complex dance of imitation, innovation, and sometimes domination. Every human species relied on tools, but the styles varied. Neanderthals mastered the Lavalo technique, shaping stone cores to produce sharp flakes with remarkable efficiency. Archaeologists find Lavala points scattered from Europe to the Levant, a hallmark of Neanderthal skill. When sapiens entered Neanderthal lands, they did not ignore these tools. Some sapiens toolkits blend their own blade technologies with Neanderthal methods. This suggests not only observation but adoption. The same rock shelters sometimes contain alternating layers of Neanderthal and sapiens tools, as if one group learned directly from the other. To a newcomer sapiens hunter, watching a Neanderthal napstone into a perfect spear point must have been eye-opening. A moment of choice followed: learn the technique, improve upon it, or risk falling behind. Fire was not unique to sapiens. Neanderthals had built hearths for hundreds of thousands of years. In caves like Kabara and Shanidar, archaeologists have found charred wood, ash layers, and even circles of stones marking ancient fire pits. Yet sapiens used fire differently. For them, the hearth was not just warmth and cooking, it was a stage for storytelling, for binding communities with myths, songs, and shared memory. Around sapiens' fires, language expanded, imagination flourished. Could Neanderthals have witnessed this? Perhaps. Imagine a winter night in the Levant. Two groups camp in the same valley, their fires visible in the dark. The crackle of flames carries laughter, song, or ritual from one camp to the other. Knowledge does not always require words, it can spread in silence, through the sight of glowing embers. Hunting was the core of survival. Neanderthals hunted large prey with close-range thrusting spears, requiring immense strength and courage. Their skeletons bear the scars of this dangerous method. Sapiens, by contrast, developed projectiles, lighter spears, otlots, and eventually bows that allowed them to strike from a distance. Could these methods have influenced one another? Evidence suggests so. Some sapiens groups in Europe adopted sturdier thrusting weapons, while late Neanderthals experimented with lighter tools. Knowledge flowed both ways, not always as a gift, but as a consequence of seeing the other succeed. One of the great debates in archaeology is whether symbolic culture art ornaments, rituals was unique to sapiens, or shared by others. Neanderthals' caves in Spain contain red and black pigments on walls, dated to before sapiens arrived. Perforated shells and eagle talons have been found as ornaments. This suggests Neanderthals practiced symbolic behavior. Sapiens, from Africa, they carried beads, carvings, and ochre designs, a tradition of symbolism stretching back 100,000 years. When the two met, the possibilities multiplied. Did Neanderthals inspire sapiens to refine cave art? Did sapiens encourage Neanderthals to expand symbolic rituals? The archaeological record shows increasing complexity in both, as their timelines overlapped. For Denisovans, the evidence is scant, but the discovery of a polished green bracelet in Denisova cave hints at symbolic or aesthetic culture. Could sapiens have admired such ornaments, copied techniques, or claimed them as trophies? Knowledge exchange is not always peaceful. Sometimes it is trade, sometimes theft, sometimes the spoils of conquest. Imagine a band of sapiens encountering a Neanderthal tool they had never seen before. They might barter food, ornaments, or labor for one. Or they might raid a camp and seize it. Either way, the idea spreads. Once seen, innovation cannot be unseen. In modern anthropology, we call this cultural diffusion, the way ideas move between groups. Between humans, diffusion can be gentle or violent, but once it begins, it rarely stops. If sapiens had an advantage in language, this would have amplified knowledge exchange. With more complex grammar, they could describe not just objects but processes, how to make a tool, where to find prey, when the herds would migrate. Neanderthals and Denisovans may have had simpler communication systems, but still capable of sharing. In encounters, sapiens could have explained, persuaded, or even tricked. Language was not just a tool for survival, it was a weapon of influence. As sapiens absorbed knowledge from others, they also absorbed their worlds. Neanderthal hunting grounds became sapiens' hunting grounds. Denisovan mountain passes became sapiens' trade routes. Floras in Luzon, once ruled by small-bodied humans, became sapiens' domains. Every lesson learned was also a step toward replacement. To use another's tools better than they could was to outcompete them. To copy their survival strategies while bringing your own innovations was to overwhelm them. Thus, the question of shared or stolen becomes blurred. Perhaps both are true. Sapiens learned, but in learning, they ensured the other's disappearance. These exchanges reveal something fundamental. Humanity has always been a borrower. We imitate, adapt, and incorporate. Our survival is not based solely on invention, but on the ability to absorb ideas from others, sometimes with gratitude, sometimes with violence. Even today, every technology we use is a palimpsest of borrowed insights. That heritage began tens of thousands of years ago, when sapiens watched Neanderthals strike stone, when they saw Denisovans thrive in thin air, when they marveled at hobbits surviving with tiny bodies on small islands. The story of sapiens and the others is not just one of battles and genes. It is also a story of knowledge, shared, stolen, repurposed. Each encounter was a transaction, whether in tools, fire, or symbols. And in the end, sapiens carried these lessons forward, layering them atop their own traditions. The result was a toolkit, both physical and cultural, richer than any one species could have built alone. This was the inheritance that allowed sapiens to cross continents, endure ice ages, and eventually reshape the entire planet. But inheritance came at a cost. For, as sapiens borrowed and absorbed, the others dwindled. By the time our species stood dominant, the chorus of human diversity had faded into a solo voice. When the last Neanderthals laid down their spears and the final Denisovans faded into the mountains, their stories should have ended. Fossils crumble. Tools rust. Myths vanish with the mouths that tell them. But something extraordinary happened. They did not vanish completely. They live on not as ghostly memories, but as sequences of DNA, hidden in the very cells of modern humans. Every person alive today who traces ancestry outside Africa carries fragments of Neanderthal DNA. In some populations, particularly in Oceania and parts of Asia, people also carry Denisovan DNA. These are not tiny, meaningless scraps. They are living echoes, shaping how our bodies respond to the world. Modern humans are mosaics, patchwork stitched from multiple lineages. When sapiens interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans, they absorbed genetic material that was preserved through natural selection. Harmful fragments faded away, but beneficial ones survived. Over tens of thousands of years, those fragments became part of us. On average, non-African populations carry about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. Melanesians and Papuans carry up to 5% Denisovan DNA. Some individuals carry unique combinations, like layers of Denisovan ancestry from multiple encounters. In absolute numbers, that means billions of people today carry genes from species once thought extinct. The Neanderthals and Denisovans did not entirely die, they were absorbed. One of the clearest benefits of ancient DNA lies in immunity. When sapiens first left Africa, they faced a microbial gauntlet: new viruses, bacteria, and parasites in Eurasia. Neanderthals and Denisovans had already adapted to those pathogens over hundreds of thousands of years. By interbreeding, sapiens borrowed their immunity. Studies show that Neanderthal genes enriched HLA, human leukocyte antigen systems, which helped the body recognize and fight infections. Other genes improved the activity of white blood cells. Denisovan genes contributed variants that strengthened resistance to certain viruses. Without these borrowed defenses, sapiens migrations might have failed. Many bands could have been wiped out by Eurasian diseases. Ancient DNA was not just heritage, it was survival. Our appearance also carries echoes of lost humans. Skin color and keratin. Neanderthal DNA influenced keratin production, affecting skin toughness and hair texture. This may have helped sapiens adapt to colder, harsher climates by strengthening skin barriers. Pigmentation. Some Neanderthal variants influence skin tone, freckles, and even tanning response. Hair. Variants from both Neanderthals and Denisovans affect hair thickness and growth patterns, still visible in certain populations today. Thus, when we look in the mirror at freckles, at hair curling or straightening, we may be seeing Neanderthal and Denisovan traits reflected back. One of the most dramatic gifts came from Denisovans. On the Tibetan Plateau, life above 4,000 meters is lethal for most people. Thinner starves the body of oxygen. Yet Tibetans, Sherpas, and highland dwellers thrive. Why? They carry a Denisovan gene called EPase-1, which regulates red blood cell production. Without it, high-altitude living causes dangerous thickening of blood. With it, oxygen use is optimized, and life in the clouds becomes possible. Every trekker gasping for air on Everest passes Sherpas whose blood sings with Denisovan heritage. The lost humans still breathe through their descendants. Not all genetic legacies are blessings. Some are burdens. Metabolic disorders. Certain Neanderthal variants are linked to higher risks of type 2 diabetes and obesity. Traits once useful for storing fat in Ice Age winters now clash with modern diets. Mental health. Some Neanderthal genes are associated with depression, nicotine addiction, and even susceptibility to schizophrenia. Perhaps adaptations for stress responses in ancient times now manifest as disorders in modern life. Immune overdrive. While Neanderthal DNA boosted defenses, some variants increase risks of autoimmune diseases, where the body attacks itself. The gifts of our cousins came with shadows. What helped in survival long ago can haunt us in the present. Genetic evidence reveals that encounters with other humans were not one-time events. They happened multiple times, in different places. Early sapiens in the Levant interbred with Neanderthals. Later, in Central Asia and Europe, more Neanderthal DNA entered the sapiens genome. In Southeast Asia, multiple waves of Denisovan ancestry appear in modern genomes. Each encounter added new layers. Our DNA today is a palimpsest of meetings, unions, and absorptions. For a long time, scientists thought Africans carried no Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA, since those encounters happened after sapiens left Africa. But recent studies suggest otherwise. Through back migration and deep genetic signals, fragments of other unknown humans, sometimes called ghost populations, may also survive within African genomes. These could represent species yet undiscovered cousins who never left fossils, but left whispers in our blood. What does it mean to be sapiens when so much of us is not purely ours? Perhaps the answer is that there was never such a thing as a pure sapiens. From the very beginning, we were a composite, shaped by encounters. This challenges old ideas of human superiority and isolation. We are not the sole survivors who triumphed alone. We are survivors because we merged. The boundaries between us and them blur in every cell of our bodies. Picture a sapiens mother 50,000 years ago, holding her newborn child. His eyes carry a hint of Neanderthal ancestors. His blood holds defenses from Denisovans. She does not know these names, cannot imagine the future of genomics. But in his body, the legacy of multiple lineages intertwines. That child's descendants spread across continents, and today, billions carry fragments of the same story. Science has revealed what she could not, that her child was more than sapiens, he was humanity woven together. The genetic legacy of other humans is not abstract science. It is personal. It shapes our immunity, our appearance, our moods, our risks and strengths. It whispers through freckles, through high-altitude lungs and restless minds. The Neanderthals and Denisovans did not simply vanish. They live within us, shaping who we are, reminding us that survival was not conquest alone, it was fusion. When we speak of humanity today, we speak not of a single lineage, but of a chorus blended into one. Our blood is a palimpsest, carrying both the light and shadows of the others we once met. By 30,000 years ago, the world had changed. For hundreds of thousands of years, Earth had been home to many kinds of humans: Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans across Asia, hobbits on Flores, Luzonensis in the Philippines, and sapiens spreading out of Africa. But one by one, the others faded. Their fires went cold, their voices silenced. Only sapiens endured. Why? What gave our species the edge? The answer is not a single miracle but a tapestry of advantages: climate, population, culture, and networks that together tipped the balance of survival. Around 40,000 years ago, the world entered the last glacial maximum. Vast ice sheets covered northern Europe and Asia. Forests shrank, deserts expanded, and food grew scarce. For small, scattered populations like Neanderthals and Denisovans, survival in such extremes was precarious. Neanderthals, adapted to cold, had thrived during earlier ice ages. But this time, the climate swung violently. Sudden warmings, followed by deep freezes, disrupted ecosystems. Large prey animals dwindled. Groups that had survived for millennia suddenly faced starvation. Sapiens, with their broader diets, had an advantage. Where Neanderthals relied heavily on large game, sapiens ate fish, birds, roots, and even shellfish. Their flexibility allowed them to ride out climate shocks. Population size matters. Genetic studies suggest Neanderthals lived in small groups, often fewer than 50 individuals, spread thin across Europe. Their total population may never have exceeded 50,000 at any one time. Denisovans, spread across Asia, were also fragmented into isolated bands. Sapiens, by contrast, formed larger groups, and maintained wider networks. Evidence of long-distance trade shells carried hundreds of kilometers. Obsidian blades moved between valleys shows that sapiens were connected. These networks acted like insurance. If one band struggled, others could share resources or mates. In small populations, disease, famine, or conflict can wipe out whole groups. In larger, interconnected ones, survival is more resilient. Sapiens created a web of humanity, while the others lived in fragile clusters. Perhaps the greatest weapon sapiens carried was complex language. While Neanderthals surely communicated, sapiens' language appears to have reached another level, capable of abstraction, storytelling, and planning on large scales. Language allowed sapiens to coordinate hunts with precision, to share knowledge across generations, to build myths that bound groups together. Around campfires, they could plan migrations, remember seasons, and pass on survival strategies. Neanderthals may have been strong hunters, but without the same linguistic complexity. Their cooperation was limited. Sapiens could mobilize dozens, even hundreds, for collective action. This scale tipped the balance. Every human species used tools, but sapiens pushed innovation further. They crafted needles from bone to sew clothing, allowing them to survive in harsher climates. They carved ornaments and painted caves, not only for beauty but to build shared identity. They invented new hunting methods, such as projectiles and traps. Innovation was not just invention, it was adaptation. Sapiens learned from every environment and from every encounter. When they met Neanderthals, they borrowed stone techniques. When they met Denisovans, they inherited high-altitude genes. When they faced new animals, they devised new hunting strategies. The others innovated too, but sapiens turned adaptation into an art form, constantly reshaping their culture. What held sapiens together was not just food or tools, but stories. Shared myths created unity beyond bloodlines. Rituals, dances, and symbols gave groups identities larger than families. Neanderthals buried their dead with care, but sapiens went further. They created symbolic art that stretched across caves and continents, a language of meaning that reinforced cooperation. Through story and ritual, sapiens could build trust among strangers, weaving alliances that strengthened survival. Survival was not always peaceful. Competition for land and prey could turn violent. Archaeological evidence shows Neanderthals suffered head injuries that may have come from combat. Sapiens, with larger numbers and better coordination, may have driven rivals from key regions. Violence does not fully explain extinction, but it likely accelerated it. As sapiens spread, the space for others shrank. Genetics reveals another vulnerability: inbreeding. Neanderthal genomes show signs of low diversity, with many individuals descended from small, isolated groups. This made them more vulnerable to disease and less adaptable to change. Sapiens, with larger and more diverse populations, avoided this trap. Their networks allowed constant mixing, refreshing genetic diversity. In evolution, diversity is strength, and sapiens carried it. Yet, survival is never only about skill. Chance played its part. A volcanic eruption, a sudden drought, a disease outbreaking could have tilted the scales. Perhaps some Neanderthal groups were simply unlucky, struck by disasters at the wrong time. Perhaps sapiens were lucky, finding rich valleys just when they needed them. History is not only written by superiority, it is also written by fortune. To say the others died out oversimplifies the truth. They did not vanish completely. They were absorbed. Neanderthals and Denisovans live on in our DNA. Their disappearance as separate species coincided with their merging into ours. From this perspective, sapiens did not exterminate rivals so much as outnumber and assimilate them. Their lineages continue, not as distinct peoples, but as fragments within us. By 30,000 years ago, the chorus of many humans had dwindled to a solo. The hobbits and Luzonensis vanished from islands. Neanderthals disappeared from Europe. Denisovans retreated into shadows. Only sapiens remained, carrying fragments of them all. The Earth had shifted from a mosaic of human diversity to a single species. It was a profound turning point. For the first time, the planet belonged to one kind of human, yet that human was not pure, but a fusion of all the rest. Why did sapiens survive while others perished? Not because they were destined, but because of a combination: flexibility in diet, larger populations, wider networks, complex language, cultural adaptability, and perhaps a measure of luck. Their survival was not a triumph of isolation but of absorption. They borrowed genes, tools, and ideas from the others. Then, through resilience and innovation, they endured when climates shifted and rivals dwindled. We are their heirs, not only of sapiens, but of every cousin who fell. Their disappearance is our story. Their survival within us is our inheritance. The world of many humans became a world of one, and from that unity, the saga of modern history began. When the first bands of Homo sapiens stepped out of Africa, they could not have known what awaited them. They carried stone blades, fire, and stories, but not certainty. Across deserts, rivers, and mountains, they met others: Neanderthals, Denisovans, hobbits, Luzonensis. Each encounter left marks, sometimes in tools, sometimes in culture, sometimes in flesh and blood. By 30,000 years ago, the world of many humans had become the world of one. Yet sapiens were no longer just themselves. They were mosaics shaped, tested, and transformed by every meeting. It is tempting to frame this history as a tale of conquest: sapiens victorious, others defeated. But the truth is subtler. These encounters were not only battles for land, they were exchanges of genes, skills, and imagination. From Neanderthals, we gained immune defenses, stronger skin, perhaps even aspects of mood and resilience. From Denisovans, we inherited the ability to breathe on mountaintops. From the hobbits and Luzonensis, we inherited something less tangible but just as vital: the knowledge that human possibilities were broader, stranger, more diverse than we ever imagined. Our survival was not simply triumph, it was fusion. But survival came at a cost. Each extinction was also a loss of perspective. What songs did Neanderthals sing around their fires? What myths did Denisovans whisper in mountain caves? What laughter echoed among the hobbits of Flores? These voices are gone. The world is quieter now. The chorus of humanity has become a solo. And though that solo is powerful, it built civilizations, cities, and space travel. It carries the silence of all those who might have walked beside us. The story of us is not a story of inevitability. It is a reminder of fragility. We survived not because we were invincible, but because circumstances, climate, cooperation, luck aligned in our favor. If the Ice Age had bitten deeper, if diseases had struck harder, if rival populations had been larger, perhaps the Neanderthals would be telling this story, and we the shadows in their DNA. Our dominance is not destiny. It is chance written into history. Today, genomics confirms what myth once intuited. We are a tapestry woven from many threads. Every human alive carries fragments of others. Our blood is not pure, but blended. Our story not singular, but collective. This is both humbling and empowering. Humbling, because we are not the chosen species that replaced all others. Empowering, because we embody them. Their strengths live in our cells. Their creativity echoes in our art. Their survival strategies pulse in our immune systems. We are, in truth, all of them at once. Why does this story matter now, tens of thousands of years later? Because it reminds us that identity is not about isolation but about connection. In a world fractured by borders and divisions, the deep past whispers another truth. We are mixtures, always have been. The first encounters teach us that survival came through learning, borrowing, and merging, not through purity. Every time we adapt, every time we embrace diversity, We reenact the same dance that carried our ancestors through ice and fire. Imagine standing at the mouth of a cave 40,000 years ago. Snow falls, wolves howl in the distance. A band of sapiens huddles around firelight. One among them carries freckles from Neanderthal blood. Another has the stamina of Denisovans. Their children inherit these gifts, unaware of the names we will later give. They are not thinking of survival of the species. They are thinking of warmth, of food, of tomorrow. And yet, in their shared genes and borrowed tools, the blueprint of the future is written. That night, without knowing, they have already become the last humans left in, the first truly global people. The encounters of sapiens with other humans were not footnotes. They were the very crucible of our identity. Without Neanderthals, Denisovans and others, we would not be who we are. Their disappearance is tragic, but their presence endures in bones, in DNA, in echoes of culture. So when we ask why we remained, the answer is simple and profound. We did not remain alone. We carry them with us. Every breath in thin air, every immune defense, every freckle, every whispered story, they are there. Humanity is not a single species that triumphed. Humanity is a chorus reduced to one voice, yet that voice carries harmonies of all the rest. And as we look to the stars, seeking new worlds, we should remember the first worlds we shared. The first encounters remind us, to be human is to meet, to mix, and to carry forward the legacies of those who walked beside us, even if their footprints have long since faded from the earth.